Okay, so welcome everyone. Good morning. This is Anoop Nair from the IPP team, and we'll be talking about in today's open bar training about simple user interface generation. So and for all of you all keeping track, this is session number 10 of our training series, and what we want to look at today is essentially how can we generate user interfaces quite easily in IPP with minimal effort from the user side. As usual, just a few housekeeping notes. The solution template for today's session is documented and available on the OpenBar wiki page, and so is the test solution instance that can be used, and you can use the already deployed solution instance on the Infinity on Demand environment to log in and test and play around with the items from today's training unit. Okay? Excellent. I assume all of you can see my screen. The solution template itself is on IOD, and the application we can use, or the model we can use for today, is a really simple loan application model, and we'll look at how different user interfaces can be generated with this really simple model. Okay, so the goal here today is to talk about in any process that we have, if you're running it in your enterprise, you essentially have requirements where you want to accept input from the user as a part of an activity, and you may have seen this in some of the previous training units as well. And you want to accept complex inputs, both for primitive type data as well as for structured type data. And you do not want to spend the time or effort to design or to draw the UIs programmatically every single time. You'd rather have these auto-generated. So that's really the focus for today's session. So the key ingredients for this model are a loan application process and a few types that we'll look at in detail. So let's start off with some of the types used in the loan application model. So the most basic type we have is a person type. And for those of you who had participated in the descriptor session a few weeks ago, this model essentially builds on the descriptors model from a few weeks. So you recognize a lot of elements and structure types from the previous session. So here I have a simple person type. A person type has a few fields. We have name, which is a text field, date of birth, which is a date-time field, a married Boolean, a salary, which is a money amount, and then we have a nested field called address. You notice that the type is address. An address has just a couple of individual fields, city and zip, which are both strings, and state is an enumeration which has a few enumerated values. So already you can see that my person type is starting to get a little large with various input types of different types that I'd like to get information from the user, right? Let's go into our loan application process. And the first activity over here is a simple manual activity where we want to accept two primitive parameters from the user. So wait for the process itself to load over here. And the two primitives that we'll be looking at getting input from the user are loan amount and application date. So these are just straight up primitives, not a part of any structure type at all. And let's see how the UI, auto-generated UI for IPP looks like. In order to generate the auto-generated UI for IPP, and you've done this in previous training units as well, all you need to do is drag the data of the corresponding input that you want to accept from the user or display to the user, drag them onto the canvas, and create data mappings from the data into the activity. So it's really straightforward. It's just a simple manual activity, and IPP is going to generate the UI for this manual activity. I already have the solution instance deployed on IoT, so I'm going to go ahead and log in right away with the default administrator credentials. And I'm going to go ahead and start this loan application process. And remember that we need to see two primitives, a simple money loan amount and a date, which is the application date. Okay. Here we go. We're logging in to the solution instance itself. And from the Startable Processes launch panel, I'm going to click on loan application process. There we go. And we are in the first obtain loan information activity of this process. And notice that what IPP has done is it has generated an auto-generated UI with loan amount being the label for the input field. I already had a default value for that input, so that's the reason why you see a value already in this example. And then I have a date field, and notice that the date field even has a date picker already available with it. Okay, so really nothing fancy here at all. It's simply two primitives, and we show you the label, and you have appropriate input controls, a numeric input box, and a date time picker from using the calendar control, right? In fact, there is some built-in validation already on this page. So since IPP knows that loan amount is of money type, if I type out invalid input over here, it will immediately flag that as invalid input as I tab out and will not let me complete this activity. So if I want to be able to complete this activity, I need to give it valid input so that I can continue. Let's go ahead and complete this activity. The next activity that we have in the process is an obtain applicant information process. This one is slightly more interesting, so let's look at this in some more detail. For the obtain applicant information process activity, I have two input data that I want to use. One is the applicant data, and one is this driver's license document. And let's look at each one of them in detail. The applicant data is nothing but another data of this person type that we were looking at. Person, as we saw earlier, was made up of several individual primitives, name, date of birth, marital status, and salary. And in addition, it also had this nested type called address, right? And the second one, which is the driver's license document, is simply a document data that exists in the same model. So this is a driver's license document that I want the user to upload as a part of this particular process. Notice that it has a data type of document. Okay. One thing that we let you do as part of the auto-generated manual activity panel is that you can customize quite a bit as to how these input data appear in the auto-generated UI. So instead of using the stock auto-generated UI, you can further customize it based on your requirements. So let's see some of the things that you can do. If you scroll down as part of the activity of the data type itself, you can set several UI parameters for each one of these. For some reason, my screen's not refreshed here correctly, so I'm just going to close this person type and open it again. So let's open the person type again. Okay. Here we go. So let's say I have one of the fields here, which is my salary field. And I want to set additional UI configuration parameters for the salary field. when you select a row in the table on the top and you go into the field property section at the bottom, you can expand this UI section and you'll see several attributes associated with the salary type. Now for the salary type, maybe I want to add a couple additional checks. I want to make sure that the user cannot proceed from that activity, and so I can mark that field as mandatory. So that's the first thing I've done. And the next thing is I want to add a prefix to the user input control. So I want to add the dollar symbol as a prefix, and as a suffix, I want to give the user a hint that the salary requirement is on a per month basis, so I can add a suffix as well. So in addition to simply having the auto-generated UI display salary with a text box next to it, I can further customize the output by putting in a prefix, putting in a suffix, and also making it mandatory. There's several additional options that you can provide here. You can set a field as read-only in case you don't want the user modifying it. If you're using a custom theme as part of your IPP deployment, you can actually set custom style classes over here. So you can have certain labels appear in red or a different color, what have you, as part of your CSS. Okay, great. So let's look at what this UI looks like when it's rendered in IPP. Remember, we completed the previous activity, and we're looking at the deployed instance over here. We see that first have an applicant section. So this is the nested type called applicant. I can fill in the name. So let's just put in a name over here. Notice that the Boolean for marital status is rendered as a checkbox. The date of birth, which is a calendar control, and then the salary field, which was customized quite a bit. Notice that it has a prefix with the dollar prefix, and the per month as the suffix, and it's also marked as mandatory. So the UI is already letting you know that it's a mandatory. Let's go ahead and fill something in over there. And then the other nested section called address, and that one is rendered as city, state, zip. Since the city was an enumeration, it also shows up as a drop-down with the various enumerators already pre-filled. Like, or to already go ahead and put in values in the enumeration list over here. Okay. My last field in my model was an other information section, and this was also a simple string. So other information is a simple string. However, as a part of the UI customization, I went in and I specified that I would like the string input type for this input string to be a text area. Okay? And then further, in addition to it being a text area, I can also customize the number of rows and number of columns that this text area actually has. And what you see in the runtime instance is I actually get a multi-line text area that is actually rendered. Yeah. Most interesting, the other input that we had to the activity was a document data. And you'd notice that driver's license is rendered with a document symbol next to it. In this case, it simply says that the document is not available. And I can go in and simply choose an arbitrary file from my local machine representing that driver's document and upload this to the activity right from within the activity panel itself. Notice that you're actually getting even document input directly from the activity panel, and it's going into this specific document called driver's license. Okay, and there was absolutely not a single line of code that was written to render this particular activity. It was all done completely using the browser-based modeler in design mode. Okay. Let's go ahead and complete this activity so that we can go to the next activity in the process. The next activity in the process is simply a verification step where I have in mappings for the same two data, the applicant data that we just put in and the driver's license document. The only difference is, in this case, I don't want to write out into these data. I simply want to read information, so it's simply a verification step. And notice that when IPP progresses to that particular activity in the process, notice that the same auto-generated UI is now rendered completely in read-only mode. And that's because we only have in mappings and there are no out mappings. If you had a manual activity with some in mappings and some out mappings, then the out mappings would show up as editable fields and the in mappings would show up as read-only fields. Okay, so that is automatically done for you by the portal itself. Further, you notice that the driver's license document, which we had uploaded in the previous step, also opens up automatically in a different tab. So the document itself is going to open up in a different tab as soon as the user activates that particular activity. This, in fact, can be configured by going into the activity panel, into the configuration panel, and specifying if you would like document mappings for a given activity to open up automatically or not. That is a configuration switch. It comes in quite handy in case you have a typical data entry type operation wherein an activity has associated documents and you want all associated documents for the activity to open up automatically in their own separate views. So this feature actually comes in quite handy in such a scenario. However, you can obviously turn it off as well. Okay, great. So let's move on to the next step. So far, what have we seen? We've seen how primitives are rendered in the first activity. We saw how more complex data using nested types like an applicant data and a driver's license document data are rendered in the second activity. How read-only controls can be generated if you have only in mappings. So let's look at the next one. And here we want to get some asset information from the user. So we want to get a list of all the user's assets. The asset structure is really simple in this model. I simply have a list of bank assets and property assets that the user can specify. Okay, and the bank assets themselves are nothing but the name of the bank and the amount, which is a money field, and the property assets are the name of the property, the address of the property, which is the same nested type that you've seen earlier, and the amount or the value of the property. Okay, so just really simple bank assets and property assets. However, each of them in the cardinality field, notice that I have not set the cardinality to exactly 1, which is what the default is. Instead, I've said that the user can specify 1 or more bank assets, and the user can specify 0 or more property assets. So I've set multiple cardinality for both these nested elements. Okay, and then in my manual activity, I simply have an in-out data mapping to the assets data. Let's see what IPP does with this information. So switching over to the runtime instance, let's go ahead and complete our previous activity. Continue. And you'll notice that IPP actually can consider the cardinality of the nested elements when it generates the UI. Here we go. So notice that we have an assets section for the assets type, and then for the bank assets, I can put in my first bank name, put in the value, and if I want to add additional bank assets, I can simply use the add, remove icons at the top of the table to add additional assets. Let's add a second asset. And if I want to delete something, I can simply select that particular row from the table, hit the remove icon, and that asset can be removed. So even for multi-cardinality input, there is a really simple auto-generated UI that lets you add 1 or more complex types. Okay? The property assets is slightly more interesting. So let's say I have a home asset valued at some amount, and it had a nested type called address. So in fact, we allow you to even add complex multi-cardinality input And when you click the edit button for the address column, it opens up a modal pop-up dialog wherein I can actually put in the address information for that nested element and close the dialog, and that information will now be persisted. In fact, if you had even further levels of nesting, you would simply see additional breadcrumb trails, and you would be able to dive into arbitrary levels of an input hierarchy. Okay. So this is quite a powerful feature wherein multi-cardinality input, and you can imagine trying to create this UI programmatically from a developer standpoint. It would not be a trivial task by any means, and all this is available out of the box as part of the manual activity itself. Of course, all the previous aspects we had seen in terms of UI customization and validation rules still apply over here. If I were to put in an incorrect input over here, it still will flag that the amount is invalid. So all the previous capabilities are still available even in the multi-cardinality UI. Okay, great. Let's move on to the next step in the process. So the next thing I want to do is I want to get some salary information from the user. And in this case, the salary information is nothing but I just want to get a document from the user, which is a salary slip. So essentially a salary verification document. So the special thing about this is an activity which has a single document mapping mapped to it. There are no other data mappings other than this document data. And what IPP does when it encounters an activity with a single document mapping is a rather special use case, so I want you to highlight that specifically. So let's go over to this particular activity. Let's go ahead and complete it. I'm going to pull up the obtain salary information activity. And what it's going to do is, just like the previous step, it's going to show you an icon for the salary slip where the user can upload the salary slip. So far, it doesn't look interesting. It's simply showing you the salary slip label, and it's showing you an upload document icon because currently there's not a document associated with it. However, notice what happens once I actually upload the document. Let me go ahead and say upload. I'm going to choose a file. Let me just pick a TIFF document over here just as an example. I'm going to upload that TIFF document. And you'll actually notice that the entire document can be viewed within the activity panel itself. So the special thing over here is if you have a manual activity with a single input document as an in or out data mapping to it, the document itself is visible as part of the activity panel directly. So you notice over here, this is my document viewer that you've seen from some of our previous sessions with document data. And you see the manual activity toolbar is available at the top. So I can still go ahead and complete the activity, suspend it, suspend and save, and so on. However, I'm actually seeing the document viewer within the activity panel itself. This is a really useful paradigm if you have an activity which is acting on a document that came in via another input mechanism. So for example, an input email document or a scan document using Infinity Scan. And then you wanted the first user in the process to simply review that the document was scanned in correctly or add any associated metadata, and then move the process forward by completing the activity. And in this special case, to have a single document mapping to the activity so that the document viewer and the activity panel are rendered one and the same comes out to be really useful. So the user can validate that the document was scanned in correctly, can optionally add in additional metadata on the details page. And once everything looks okay, I can simply complete the activity right using the activity toolbar. Okay. So the special use case here is a single document mapping to an activity. Okay. So those were various flavors of IPP's auto-generated UI using data of various types. Now let's switch gears a little bit and look at what if you really wanted to have absolutely complete control over the UI itself. You didn't want to use the auto-generated UI, but maybe you already had a screen in your existing product that you wanted to mash up instead of the activity panel. So this is a case where you may have an ASP.NET or a JSP or JSF or any arbitrary technology web app that already has an input screen available that you want to use as a part of an IPP activity. Let's see how you might be able to do that. So I have a background check process over here, and the background check process has one activity. The first one simply gets some loan application information, the same one as before. I just get a loan amount. And then I have this UI mashup. So let's see how a UI mashup really works. The UI mashup is nothing but another application that I can create using the application's context menu and saying create UI mashup. Let's look at what this UI mashup actually looks like. The UI mashup allows me to first specify if I want to have any input parameters or output parameters from this activity or from this application activity. In this first example, I'll simply ignore the parameters and more talk about how you can embed the other screen from your application. So let's look at the external UI mashup. And you notice I don't have any parameters defined. I don't want to exchange any data for now. However, in my configuration section, notice that I can say I want another URI to be embedded, and I can simply provide the URI for that other application screen. In this case, I just want to go to the Wikipedia homepage in the English language and show this to the user as part of the activity. It's a really simple use case wherein I'm mashing up the Wikipedia homepage in the activity panel. And let's see how this looks like when the user interacts with it. So let's go ahead and close all these open views that we have. Let's start a new background check process. So we need to get the applicant information, same as before, so I'm just going to continue this first activity. And now we should come up to the UI mashup, which is the Wikipedia mashup. And notice how I have the activity toolbar, but the main body of the page is the external web app. And of course, you can have any other arbitrary web app that you already have, or you could even design something specifically for your project and embed that as an additional jar artifact and upload that to the solution and reference the custom screen from your jar artifact as part of the activity. So you could do this several different ways. As you can see how simple it is to embed an external screen as part of the activity panel. Okay. Now let's look at yet another flavor of this, wherein I want to embed this, the markup for this external activity as part of my application itself. So I have another example here, which is the embedded UI mashup. And a couple notes over here. So firstly, in order to see these configuration and test tabs if you log in to the solution instance, you need to make sure that technology preview is turned on. You probably know how to do this already. You need to go into the portal configuration panel, go to browser modeler, and say show technology preview options on. And in IPP 7.3.1, which is the version that's currently available on IOD, this feature was still in technology preview. In the upcoming 7.3.2, which should be out in a few weeks, this is now production ready, and you will no longer have to turn this feature on using the technology feature switch. Okay? So when you go into the configuration tab for that same mashup, and note that earlier we had done the via URI option, now we are picking embedded. You now can generate markup for HTML5 AngularJS, and I can click on that icon, on that link, and when I click on the generate link, IPP is automatically going to generate a bunch of code which shows you what the default UI looks like. And this is standard straight up HTML code that you can heavily modify using either the WYSIWYG editor that you see here, or if you're more comfortable in source mode, you can modify it in source mode. In this case, you now have really full control over what the markup looks like. You can even customize this to add, a logo, a header, and a footer using the really simple formatting tools available in the WYSIWYG editor. Okay. Notice that we had a parameter mapped to this particular activity. So we had an amount input field mapped into this activity, and when IPP generated the markup using HTML5 Angular, it's generating markup even for the input mapping, so for the amount fields. And we'll see what this looks like when you see this at runtime. So let's go to the runtime aspect. Let me go ahead and complete this external UI mashup. So here is the embedded UI mashup. And notice that it looks really simple here because I did not customize anything, but I could have changed colors. I could have added some custom branding headers or footers over here, and all that would be visible as a part of this UI mashup. So really, you have both flavors available. You could either rely completely on IPP to do all the markup generation using the auto-generated manual activity panel, or if you wanted more control, you could use a UI mashup wherein you could embed an existing screen from your app, or simply use the auto-generated markup code from IPP and then customize it in the WYSIWYG editor that you have. Okay? I can complete this, and that would then complete my process. Okay? Everything that we've seen so far, like I said, is all available on IOD. The links are available on the OpenBauer wiki page itself. I went a few minutes over time here. There's quite a bit that we had to cover. So I'll open up the floor now for any questions that you may have regarding UI generation in IPP.
Based on what you said, it sounds like you can send parameters to another application, but once you that other application and start processing or whatever, do you have the ability to pull data back into IPP?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I didn't touch on that, and that's a great question. So as a part of the mashup itself, you can define parameters that are both input and output. I can quickly show you how that's done actually. On the parameters tab, I have defined amount as an in parameter. I can simply say, so let's say this was a background check process, and I needed to get information back as to whether the background check succeeded or not. So I could simply have a verified parameter. I could call that as an out parameter. Provide the type, provide the data, and what IPP would do is IPP would know that it's waiting for a verified Boolean or whatever the type is out of this activity, and we have APIs available to interact with the activity instance using a simple REST protocol, and you could pass that information back to IPP either from your custom app or using the embedded app. And what I'll do is, as a part on the OpenBauer wiki page, I'll actually add a link wherein the API from the documentation is specified. So absolutely, it's bi-directional communication wherein you can get data from IPP as well as send data back to IPP to update the process.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. One additional note on that great question there is that as far as primitive parameters are concerned, so if you had something as simple as an amount or a date, these parameters are also passed in as URI parameters. So you would not even need to use any APIs to access them. They're simply passed in as URL parameters using the standard URI parameter mechanism, and you can access these parameters directly from the URI. Great. Any other questions relating to UI generation? Okay. There's no other questions. I would encourage you to either use the solution template to create your own solution, to play around with what we've seen as a part of this session, or just log into the solution instance that already exists, and you should be able to see everything that we just walked through as a part of the session. Thank you for everyone's time, and we'll see you again next week. Bye.
Thank you, Anoop.
The conference is ending. Goodbye.